Hello, everyone. This is yet another episode of Career Talks by Welcome Solutions. And in these episodes, we talk with professionals who have interesting career paths and who are willing to share the life hacks, who are willing to share their life hacks with us. And today, I have a great pleasure to introduce Justin Shenk. Justin is the CTO and co-founder of VisioLab, an AI software company. He is completing an external PhD with Radboud University in Nijmegen, and his background includes neuroscience research and building deep learning applications for Intel and Peltarion as a data scientist. He is currently based in Berlin, Germany. Thank you so much, Justin, for joining us today. Happy to see you again after some time. And I'm very curious about your career story from the very beginnings, as I know that you have quite a non-linear career path, and you first started working in industry, then decided to do your PhD, and now you're back in industry, this time with your own company. So I'm very curious to hear your story told from your own perspective.
Well, first off, thank you, Natalia. I'm glad to be here. And I've been quite a fan of your videos that you've showed on YouTube so far. It's really inspiring to see how you can bring together people who have similar backgrounds or different backgrounds, but bring them together on the same topic of how to figure out what you want to do, especially coming from a scientific background. So really, it's really an honor to be here with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you first started your professional career many years ago when you, some years ago, when you found your first job after master studies? And could you tell us a little bit more about your career decisions ever since?
Sure. So going back, it does feel like a long time ago to when I started in biology. I started in research and was doing neuroimaging research, looking at activation of the brain and patterns of the brain for speech and motor control. And going from research to industry took me quite a while. I think I was not sure what I wanted to do coming out of my my master's degree in biology, and there were many options in terms of, okay, within research there's a lot of different options, and then also you hear stories of people going into industry and finding things that are interesting there. And actually being based in the science but also having a lot of interest in technology, I explored some computational approaches, and that led me to returning to studies some years later. I lived in various countries for some years before and had a chance to explore different ideas about what kind of career would be right for me. But yeah, it was, for example, I found this program in Germany called cognitive science, which was bridging from biology to mathematics, statistics, machine learning. And that gave me a chance to stay in the area that I was already comfortable with, which was understanding the really complex problems of, like, how does the brain work? How do biological systems work? Really, really complex things. And then a framework that is much more, say, straightforward in a way, something you can model or write down on paper, like modeling systems. So it was a great bridge for me to get stay in something familiar, but also try something new. That's generally a theme that I'll probably promote quite a bit, how important it is to try new things, especially if you're coming from scientific research.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the PhD program that you chose? Because from what I understand, it's not like a classic way of doing a PhD. You did external PhD, which is, at least here in the Netherlands, is not a standard. So the standard way is to get a full-time 4-year contract with university, and get a promoter and get your seat behind the desk, and become a member of a graduate school, where you are like in contact with maybe 50 to 100 other people who are kind of in the same PhD candidate cloud. and you have also common activities and excursions and also seminars, and this is more like a little community. But of course, you're also packed to your own lab, so you have a promoter and you have like lab meetings, and you have, of course, you're a boss of your own project, so you have to lead your PhD project for 4 years and end up hopefully with a PhD thesis. But in your case, it looked a little bit different. So can you tell us a little bit more about how your PhD looked like and why you chose for this external PhD?
Sure. So, right, my experience was a little bit different. For one, because I was starting much later in my life and had already quite a bit of research experience behind me. So the story goes that I was in Peltarion, working with Peltarion in Stockholm, Sweden, and on the board of directors is a computer science professor, Jan Bosch, and I made clear to the company that I was interested in doing a PhD, and he was very helpful in helping me find a supervisor in the Netherlands who I could do an external PhD with, which would allow me to do the PhD alongside my work. So the topic of studies then is like a bridge between the programming, which at the time was really my main interest, to get more in depth into programming and data analysis, and also my previous background with biology, so looking at the effect of diet on neuronal pathology. So it's quite a nice bridge, fortunately, and I was quite lucky to find a supervisor, Amanda Killian, who was having enough data that I could work with. So in my first conversation with her, the question was like, hey, do you have data? Like, how much data do you have? What kind of data? Because it was something where I know I could make a contribution, and that also wouldn't require me to be there physically in person to do experiments. And yeah, so far it's been a really good relationship, and I've been really lucky to be able to combine these two sides of my life that I care a lot about.
Cool. Okay, so how did it, like in practice, how did it look like? So did you live in Nijmegen during your PhD, and did you have a day job? Were you like funded by university? Could you tell us a little bit more what external PhD actually means?
Yeah, sure. So in this case, I was for the first year in Stockholm, based in Stockholm, and working, say, 20% of my work week was on the thesis and a lot of my free time. So that was working pretty well, but like you also get the feeling that, you know, like at some point it was also really quite stressful because you don't have much time left over for non-research things. But I understand that I can at least sympathize with a lot of people who have focused purely on research during their PhDs, and how it really becomes like a camaraderie of people who are overcommitted to research. So I think I can appreciate that aspect of it. So coming from then Sweden back to Germany, I continued doing the PhD work. So at various times I was spending more or less time on it, but basically, yeah, it was a lot of work. My schedule was not sane for most of the past 3 years. And then starting a company, VisioLab, last year. Yeah, it's been a really good experience. I've been able to apply what I had learned and the skills I had before starting the PhD to the topic. And I can only recommend, if you're not sure about doing a PhD, then gain some experience or a specific skill that'll be really useful for a team. And then when you join, you'll be able to apply that without as much friction, and you'll be more confident about what you can do with your skills when you start the PhD.
Mm-hmm. So did you ever have like second thoughts? For instance, did you ever think to yourself, well, the life would be easier for me if I chose to do a PhD the regular way, or like the, so that I only have one thing to care about, which is my actual PhD full time? or if I never really took a decision to do a PhD? Or do you think this is like in hindsight, this was the right decision to do it exactly this way?
Interesting question. So I've had a chance to meet some people the last few years who really inspired me about what a PhD can mean, like personally. So some people who just found a project and a topic that they love and want to spend their time doing, but would not be able to do this in industry. And if they did it as a hobby, they wouldn't get paid for it at all. So like that's a category of topics and a match of people and topics that is to me like the ultimate reason to do a PhD, because you just really love something. It's a hobby that you can turn into a profession. So for example, researcher, a PhD student in Osnabrück, Viviana Kickerbach, she's doing her Clay as her married last name. She's doing a topic of like deep learning for with simulations where you have characters running around in arenas, and you can do deep reinforcement learning to understand the decisions they're making based on how they perceive things. So like super interesting topic that would be really hard to justify to any kind of company like, hey, we're going to do this really experimental thing. So I find it super inspiring, and it makes sense to me if you're going to do a PhD to find something that you really enjoy doing. And it's often hard to know before you start what kind of modality you're going to spend most of your time doing, unless you're purely in the math direction or purely in the biology, molecular biology direction. So yeah, I think finding a niche where you can do something that you enjoy, it might be worth spending a couple of years to figure that out before you commit to multiple years of a specific direction.
But I also think that it's often the case that projects are packed in certain ways. Like people who come to neuroscience, for instance, they often think that, well, neuroscience is all about um, thinking about the brain and the cognition and just thinking about how we reason and how emotions work. And in some ways, it is about that. But the daily life is just it doesn't. It's not associated with as much like philosophical with philosophical discussions, right? It's you have a project and most of it is just being down to the gallows and calculating stuff or testing participants or building some infrastructure, and it's hard work that is nowhere near to just deliberating about humanity or the nature of human brain. So the daily life looks very different from what you could imagine before you started the PhD, just solely on the basis of the job description. And I studied physics before, and studies in physics were kind of the same for me. It was like in high school, I was interested in black holes and how the universe started, and all these theories behind, like Big Bang theory and theories behind how universe is structured and how it all began. And then I came to university and I realized that the studies in physics are all about calculating tensors and all these complex formulas, and it's just solving formulas, and nobody's talking about how we all, like, where it all began. There's not no such thing. Maybe once a year at some yearly drinks with your professor, you can casually mention something and start deliberating for 5 minutes, but that's it. And the rest of the year is pretty much it's a grind and trying to get skilled in actually solving formulas. So I think it's often comes hard to basically figure out from the outside how it all looks like, and you have to unfortunately um, test it on your own skin. But that's also why it's so important to change your mind sometimes and just ask yourself, is this what I really came here for? Because I think we often don't do it early enough. And if I think
Yeah.
about my own PhD, it also I didn't really it wasn't really what I expected, but I never really found time and energy and guts to tell myself, okay, this is maybe not what I should be doing right now with my time. But anyways, I'm happy that it worked for you
Yeah.
and that you're finally happy about your decision. And I would like to hear a little bit more about your company. because I know that it's going well for you. So congratulations. And could you tell us a bit more about how VisioLab has started, and about how you found your co-founder, and about where did you take a concept from, and why did you decide to work on this particular topic? And first of all, what the company does. That's the question
Yeah,
number one.
sure. Well, first, like to mention on your previous point about how going into science and finding that it's less maybe about the really broad questions and gets quite specific. It reminds me of the saying that going into science to explore the wonders of nature is like becoming a priest to meet girls. It's like, yeah, you can do it, but it's not the main point. Um, so yeah, science, like the romantic part of science, the part that's really interesting and it is, yeah, quite separate from the modality of most day-to-day work. But you do probably meet interesting people and have interesting conversations. That's true. So yeah, cool. Then to answer your question about VisioLab, so yeah, the story begins about a year and a half ago, where I was introduced to a CEO of a Jewish hospital, where they were looking to do food recognition as an app for recognizing what kind of food and calories were being consumed and the volume of the food as it was changing. And I was in the position of estimating what would be the feasibility of this type of project given a certain budget. And I looked at it and thought about different ways to do it. And around this time when I was figuring out what would be the feasibility and if I would be a good person to build this, I came across my co-founder, Tim Niekamp, who was also actually, in some ways, he was quite further in the process because he had set up the company in Germany and he had already found interns or found students who could work on this project and get a cool prototype up. So we were coming from quite different perspectives. So he was coming from a business perspective, building a product, and I was coming from a more technical consulting perspective. And yeah, the timing was perfect in a way because we got to share, like leverage each other's strengths and to build a team that, yeah, since last year, it's been a rocket ride of, of changes. And yeah, super happy that I've had this experience so far. And I see a lot of potential. The main challenge that we're trying to solve now is how to use computer vision and AI, machine learning, to recognize food on trays for the purpose of automated checkouts. So this scenario is that if you go to a canteen or a cafeteria and you put your tray of food under an iPad, how fast can we make the checkouts so that it's automated and it does the task of calculating the cost as fast as possible so that you can have an enjoyable meal and the benefit for the canteens is that you can set multiple of these up at once. So you can have 4 or 5 or 6 different checkout iPads systems and parallelize the operations. So that's pretty interesting on the business side. And on the tech side, there's so many challenges that you come across that are at least interesting to learn about, sometimes difficult to solve, but you don't have a shortage of interesting conversations about what's the best approach. Like that's a fun part of it in the engineering side.
Right. Well, actually, I'm tempted to ask you a question. Since I think everyone has a element of a con artist in them. Even if you're a good person, then I think everyone has that button somewhere in their head, and just switching that button on, I have to ask you, what if I put like one banana over another one, let's say, and just put this ashtray behind your sensor? And what do you do then? Can you recognize that this is actually a fraud or not?
That's a funny question. We hear that a lot. So, and also for what it's worth, I've noticed more business people will ask this question than tech people. So I don't know if that indicates that you've shifted over already into the
I
business
was
camp.
screwed over enough times.
that could be it. Like, yeah, maybe scientists are just too sheltered. But yeah, this is an interesting question. So for sure, we can recognize with our system some like obvious types of fraud, but it's not intended in the current form to be kind of to catch everything. Like if you think in the spectrum of let's build a whole store that has 100 different sensors and does facial recognition, and yeah, probably it's the store of tomorrow in China and the store of tomorrow in Germany. But that kind of stuff is quite far away. Where what we're talking about more is like, okay, let's say you want to quickly scale up your operations and you still have a cashier there who can keep an eye on things. Or let's say that the fraud is the minimal case because it's an employee canteen where your boss is looking over your shoulder anyways. So we're starting with the kind of easy markets to go into. And from there, we'll be able to figure out exactly where's the proper balance between adding more sensors and versus, okay, make this super affordable and scalable. Yeah.
Right. So the answer is I can cheat.
Yeah. Yes. If
Simple.
you want a list of canteens where you can cheat at, I can provide you with that afterwards.
All right. Good. There's like so much interesting information I get out of shooting these episodes that is just beyond the original purpose. Okay, well, noted.
The side benefits, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So can you say a little bit about your methods? So what type of software you're building? Is there any like proprietary technology that you're building, or you're optimizing the current ways of, I guess it's a classification problem, right? What you're solving. So the visual recognition you do, I think it's some, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Yep.
I guess that's a classification problem. So are you
Mhm.
optimizing the currently popular algorithms for that, or are you building something new?
Yeah, good question. So we try a lot of different things, and especially in the beginning, we tried so many different approaches, from state of the art to YOLO, out of the box implementations, and we found that it makes sense. First off, that like something that's written for a paper is designed to work in an academic context, and then the exception is some things that are more clearly, for example, like a lot of things that Google research does or Facebook research or like bigger companies that publish research tends to be have applications beyond academic settings.
Mhm.
So it turns out that we're currently using a combination of approaches. So we do use object detectors like YOLO and faster RCNN, but also other unsupervised learning techniques. So it turns out that there's a lot of stuff that you can do with the information when you take an image and you put it through one of these object detector models. Then the output of that is something, a feature vector that you can use for further classification and get further information from.
Mhm.
And we're currently looking into more experimental approaches to combine information that we get, like metadata from the dish.
Mhm.
For example, if we know that this dish is a pasta or a salad or a drink, then we can use the information from that text embedding to make additional classifications or to improve the performance of our model.
Mhm.
So yeah, it does end up being more complex than something that you get out of the box. But I would say like the most complex stuff that we've seen is really, like, if you look at research papers that say state of the art, few shot learning, object detection, like a lot of that is really niche stuff and is not necessarily the thing that's going to work in most cases.
Well, actually, I've seen some research recently about comparing the results between two cases. One where you work on the quality of the input data, and another where you work on the quality of the algorithm. And it was clear that the algorithms are usually good enough. It's more about the quality of the data. So that's actually much better uh, thing to focus on. So in fact, that's also how a lot of people working in machine learning like consume and lose most of their time. They just really try to tweak the algorithms to get this 0.1% better, better success rate. But in fact, what they lose most of their um, reliability on is the data. So
Yeah,
maybe that's
that's a
the case here.
for sure. That's a good point. And that's one thing we've also learned is that uh, being able to control the environment where the algorithm is happening, or the data is fed into the model is the most crucial aspect. So being able to constrain the problem as much as you can really, really helps.
Right.
So if you can control for example, there's lights overhead, they're going to be flickering on and off, then that's a pretty clear target to start with.
Right.
And then from that point of view, you have probably, yeah, as much challenge of trying to think about how do I get the user, like the user experience to be constrained, as you do about how do I get the 0.1% improvement from a different model. Yeah.
Right. Right. And so, are you also so? Like, I know that in this area there is of visual recognition. Now there is a hype for deep neural networks. So, are some of your methods also do they include deep nets or not really?
Yeah, definitely. So from the beginning, we tried a lot of deep network applications, and starting, as far as I know, this is standard for both for our competitors and also for research, for the state-of-the-art research. Deep learning approach is really crucial. Uh, the advantage comes from the ability to take an image and to find patterns in images. And for that, convolutional neural networks are the standard. That's of course changed a lot in the last 10 years. So it wasn't the standard 10 years ago and it's the standard today.
Right.
Then you could ask, well, okay, what will be the standard 10 years from now? I'm really curious to see where things will go. It seems like things are moving such a fast speed in terms of technology. So I think it's exciting to know that as a company in this space, like we have to be at the front of the technology. It's one of the parts I like about my job, is that I have to be able to anticipate the changes that will come in terms of, okay, like if it becomes, even easier to recognize items. So say one of the big tech companies releases a machine learning model that can automatically recognize anything as anything. So this is kind of in a way a worst case scenario that and that make that free. Then then you ask questions more on the business side. Okay, what is our unique selling point in that case?
Mm-hmm.
So I can't take for granted that what works today will be useful 10 years from now.
Right.
But yeah, like you mentioned, you want to stay agile and you want to be prepared to handle these changes as they come up.
I fully agree with you. I think this is one problem with IT companies, that it's quite it's very competitive, and it's often the case that the biggest player wins the market. And as soon as someone is big enough to start charging, to start actually making income from marketing and from the traffic, organic traffic, then they make the software free, and then for all the small companies that have the paywall, then this is like a disaster. So that would be definitely my biggest fear if I was in that space. But well, let's hope for the good. Maybe if you indeed specialize in some specific area and have just more a better quality detection in that particular area, maybe there is still space for small companies. Like I don't consider myself an expert so in this area, so I don't know, but let's hope for the good. You recently found an investor, which is very exciting, right? Like for what I know, you got some seed investment coming to the company. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think the press release will probably come after the airing of this video, but yeah, we're excited that we've been able to secure the first large investor for the seed round, and that lets us focus on the next couple of years of development and growth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the hustle has already been on for quite a while, feels like, but it's, in a way, it kind of legitimizes the work that we put into things, and also helps me to shield the tech team from like having to think about, okay, how long can we plan ahead? So now it's much clearer. And yeah, that's brought mostly, at least at the moment, I'm seeing mostly the positives of this. And I think what challenges come from taking investment, for example, is more likely, from what I understand, it comes with later larger investments where you have to make harder decisions about what path to go down because the stakes are much higher for everyone. So yeah, at this stage, I'm really glad that we can focus and that our hard work has been recognized, and yeah, that our investors see how the industry is going to change and how we're in a good position to deliver that change.
Mm-hmm. Great. So congratulations on your investment.
Thank you.
And like I have like more general question about this industry, which is what is actually possible with for AI algorithms in terms of visual detection today. I'm curious because I also I'm wondering about that regarding one of my projects. It's like unrelated to my company, but I'm actually thinking about whether or not it's possible to create some tasks that are based on visual detection that are actually easy for humans but very difficult for machines. And I know that actually Google CAPTCHA and like these authenticators online kind of use those tasks because sometimes you have to choose the set of pictures that represent certain category or so. So apparently those are good tasks to tell the difference between a human and a bot. But I'm wondering what is or will be possible within the next 5 to 10 years with AI, and if there will be some point in time when AI is as good as human with the visual detection. Do you think that it will ever happen?
Good question. So as far as I know, the AI has beat humans on many, if not most, visual tasks. So I'm trying to think of the exceptions, actually. Like the CAPTCHA is a good exception. Not because they can't recognize bicycles, because I mean, for example, it says click the bicycles. That the AI can recognize bicycles without problem given enough data. But the CAPTCHAs where, for example, imagine you have an adversarial attack. So you throw enough noise onto the image in a way that is designed to make it hard for the algorithm to recognize the item or to falsely classify it. Those kind of cases, that's the edge case
Mm-hmm.
that I'm most familiar with in terms of breaking the AI, or where humans are better. And this is a rather special case because it's specifically designed for that purpose. So if the question is like, how will AI improve over humans in the future? I think as long as there's data available, the AI could reach human performance generally. And if not, then it has to be specifically like targeted to not perform well through adversarial attacks. But I mean, that's a really generalization. And then the third generalization I might make on this is there's things where you don't have a clear category to assign things. For example, like what makes something distinct or not.
Mm-hmm.
So like a person can recognize a dog after seeing a dog once, that it's a distinct thing, like there's something distinct about a dog, and to generalize that concept, and then see a cat and to know that that cat is a different thing. So teaching an algorithm or an AI system to identify things as different things then becomes a bit of a philosophical discussion. Like how do you, how is it that like children can learn a word once and be able to use that word appropriately forever afterwards? That's incredible. And I don't know how do we measure the success of AI to do the same thing unless we restrict the task so much to say like, okay, given labeled data X, can you predict Y? That's the very like supervised learning case. And the more ambitious machine learning approaches are the unsupervised learning case, where it's harder to define what the actual task is. Like you can identify, okay, this word was used somewhat correctly in the correct context and somewhat incorrectly in the other context.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're getting to like actual human fuzziness of categories. So in a way, like technologically, I'm quite optimistic about unsupervised learning approaches, because you don't assume to have a black or white label for things. That's more accurate to how people think. But it's then raises a lot of philosophical questions or just general curiosity about how to compare human intelligence with artificial intelligence.
Right. All right. Very interesting. Hard to predict for sure. I also know that what the algorithms are currently very bad at, is sense of humor, especially understanding irony is almost impossible. And actually, there are some trials to create algorithms that imitate human sense of humor and generate jokes, and these are usually very bad jokes, and but bad in a really bad way. So not bad so that they are good, but really just completely uh, you know miss the point. So it's so
Yeah.
that's also, I think, good news, in the sense that if you're a person who has a sense of humor, then you should nourish and you should nurture your talent to generate humor, because it's not only something that can make people around you happier at work and really leverages your value as an employee, as a coworker, but it's also something that is very hard to replace by a machine, unlike many other tasks. So this is something people usually don't take into account. That might be their core competence, but it might be actually, and probably in 5 to 10 years it will be even more important and more like distinct than now.
Relationships are still super important.
Yeah. Well, there will be always, and that's one thing that doesn't change. And human psychology doesn't change. You can see it from the current bull run. It's the same as in 2017. People don't learn. Like, emotions never change really, and the basics of like how people make decisions and behave, that it will never change. I think even with this perfect, if AI gets to the point where it takes most of our jobs and we don't even need to work anymore, I think still, um, human nature will not change so quickly. Anyways, sorry, like I'm getting to like outer space with my thoughts, but okay. All right. So next question I have for you is about possible future directions for your company. Since the visual recognition and detection is like, as you said, a very like broad topic, and there are so many potential applications. Do you also think about your next steps, or is the what you do right now, so creating solutions for Horeca industry, is this are you planning to set the scope of the company on this particular application, or are you already thinking of potential future directions?
Yeah, well, so it definitely makes sense to get some traction before figuring out new directions. And at the same time, it's useful to have in the back of your mind what could be another way to go. So, for example, I think most of the people in the catering space have had to question some assumptions the past year since a lot of canteens have been closed due to COVID. What I think is important generally for us is to set the scope for the technology so that it's useful beyond the specific business case or use case, because the technology is there to solve problems, to make people's life easier. And I think you can learn a lot from getting a product to market and to see how the reception is for specific products. And you can learn a lot about the user experience, and you can learn a lot about how your backend technology is stable for certain situations. All those things you can take with you and put in another use case, another environment, another business case. So I think it is partly my responsibility to make sure that we balance the focus on the near term of getting to market and really understanding the problems that our customers are having and how to add value to them, with building sort of scalable infrastructure and software that has applications beyond one specific sort of dependency or one specific use case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there's also one actually exciting thing about business development, that you don't know the future. And actually, it took me a while to start treating this fact as a positive uh, rather than as a caveat. Initially, I was, because in academia, we like to think about our goals in a distant future as like very well defined goals. So if you enter grad school, like most people still have this mindset that they want to land a tenure track position. And once you start building a company, you have to change this thinking and become much more flexible with your goals. So even the goal of developing a business might lead you. It sounds like a well-defined goal, but in fact, you can develop towards like 20 different directions, and then it's not as well defined as it looks at first. So I think it took me a while as well to change my attitude and approach, and stop really thinking in terms of what precisely I want to be my career like in 20 years, but more like acting in this like action reaction type of way, where you create products to solve problems, and if some problem doesn't seem to be important anymore, or like you already created a solution, or the solution is not even necessary anymore, then you have to change the scope, and this is fine. And actually accepting that this is fine and you have to go forward is yeah, it now I feel comfortable about it, but it took a while. uh, but once you accept it, it gives a lot of freedom, and making decisions upon the rules you have and the general guidelines and heuristics that you um, worked out, rather than on the basis of some elusive goal that is on your mind and that you're planning to get to in 20 years, is probably just much more joyful, and also leads to much better career decisions as well. And that's also what I'm working on at the moment: how to create those heuristics in the right way to open as many doors as possible, and make sure that you still focus enough to do your core projects and develop them to the best of your abilities, and how to keep this balance. That's really, really difficult.
Mm.
um, all right, so can you maybe tell us a little bit more about the way you look at your career so far? And so you were working in industry, then you did your PhD. You're still about to graduate, but it's kind of set already, so we can say you're a PhD to be right now. And now you're a CTO of your own company. So is there anything in your career path that you would do differently if you had a chance? Is there thinking, do you think about some of your career decisions as unnecessary, or even like, yeah, harmful in a way when you look at it from in hindsight?
Mm. Good question. I think it's hard to find a place where I would definitely have done something different. I think in hindsight, you can say, but if I knew then what I know now, then I would have started sooner on the same path. But I can also pretty easily say that one of the reasons why I really like the path I'm on now is because I tried other things that I didn't like as much.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to know that I would be satisfied unless I had made those experiences. So yeah, I think that one thing that I would recommend to, say, a younger version of myself is to just be a little more proactive in seeking out new experiences, contact people more, network aggressively if you have to, really be persistent. So I think these are skills that aren't taught directly to you in a scientific education, but end up being super, super valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's kind of like, it makes sense that on the spectrum, or like the skill wheel, like in science, you can learn analytical skills really well. And on the other end of that spectrum, you've got maybe more social skills.
Mm-hmm.
And it just turns out from my experience that social skills are so much more valuable than are given credit for in a scientific education. So I'm not sure how you found it with physics, like in biology and chemistry or physics labs, we did have interactions, we had teams, but I think the skills that help you to uh, manage a team of 10 or 20 people are probably not going to be developed sufficiently in the case of pure academic laboratory work, say undergraduate level. So like, yeah, taking student leadership roles if you can, if it suits your personality, is things that I found really useful. And yeah, not being afraid to message people across the internet and see if you get a response back, and see if there's some way that you can help other people in a way that also helps yourself. So volunteer if you have the privilege to do so, and get experience that opens your world a bit.
Right. And I also think that when we network, we often um, network in a way that we ask for things, right? So we think, okay, I need this. Like, let's say I'm looking for a job, I need a job. So who can provide that job for me, or who can provide information that will help me get a job? And we start interacting with people in a way that we actually want something from them. So we're just searching through our network and trying to just shake out something out of our personal contacts in a way. And what works better often is doing exactly the opposite. It's called netweaving. It's thinking about, okay, what can I contribute? What are these different little bits that I can do? For instance, if I know that someone has a problem and someone else has a solution, that these people don't know each other, they come from my different circles. One of them is my high school friend, the other one is my a person I just met at the business meetup, but I can actually give them contact to each other, and maybe it works. But it's just this heuristic to build networks, but in a different way, thinking exactly the opposite, and thinking about how I can contribute to other people's careers and lives. And it's usually, actually, for a person who is doing that, it usually brings more overall more benefit than networking, because this is also very like human, that we feel also we feel we want to contribute and give back. So if we get help, we also want to help back, and people who have that approach usually benefit more from the time they spend on building networks than people who have that attitude that they have a goal and they know what they want to get out of the network. So I think it's also, so because I'm saying this, because it's also often the case that as PhDs we have a lot of this career advice from everywhere, and this topic of networking is coming over and over again. It's like one of the most popular pieces of advice you can get: network, network, network. But you have to also know how to network. So there are
Mm.
as with everything, you can do it in a way that will make you only lose time, and you have to also recognize relatively early on if someone you talk with is just full of themselves, or they really know what they are talking about, or if you're or if you're networking the right way. So there are there are ways of spending an evening at the let's say IT meetup that will actually uh, largely increase the strength of your professional network, and there are ways to just lose time and just spend this time on meaningless conversations in the wrong corner of the room with the people who you don't have anything in common with, and you will get nothing out of it. So it's a different, so to network properly, it's requires much more skill than to just network.
That's true. It's a good point. You remind me that there's no like silver bullet for happiness. Like there's no one solution, and also what may be helpful for one person, a totally different approach might be helpful for someone else.
Mhm.
So yeah, the way you describe net weaving, it's reminds me of like how valuable it is just to understand what other people are going through. And if you, yeah, like you say, if you're just trying to find a job, okay, like, yeah, if you're just trying to optimize for one function, then sure, like keep hammering at the same nails that you have. But if your goal is to figure out, well, what do I want to actually do,
Mhm.
then in that case it might be more relevant to get a wider view of the kind of things people are experiencing so that you can figure out what place could you fit into.
Mhm. Right, right. Yeah, and sometimes it's also a counterintuitive thing to be more egoistic. Actually, this is also a problem that many people make, like the mistake many people make during their career, that they are just not enough oriented on themselves. They don't spend enough time defining better what they actually enjoy to do, um, and what they want to do, and then they wake up at the age of 30 or 30, 35 having no idea whatsoever, and or they never wake up. So actually this is a counterintuitive fact, but I think the world would be better if we all were a bit more egoistic. And because there is a lot of misery coming from the fact that we don't think about ourselves early enough. And so that's maybe controversial thing to say, but I think if we spend more time thinking about ourselves, we would be also in better places, doing more efficient projects in more efficient ways, and solving more problems for others. So,
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Like I haven't heard a intellectually satisfying definition of self to help me agree with that statement. So, for example, it's not obvious to me the difference between me as an isolated individual and my group of friends, my family, people I care about. So, I think the pure egoism doesn't make sense, obviously, because like I don't know anyone who's anyone who I care to admire who is purely egoistic and has no like no network of concern outside of their individual self. But like, yeah, if you say like generally make rational decisions or something, like, yeah, generally like consider that, you know, don't be overly idealistic, like these kind of things. If that's what you mean, then it's easier for me to agree with.
mhm, right. All right. I think we have to slowly come to the end of this episode. So, last question I have for you is a standard question I often ask, which is there any general career advice that you would like to give to young people today who are thinking about their future and who might potentially also think about their own business, but they don't feel they have guts to do it? Is there anything you would like to share with them?
Yeah, sure. I think it's I think a lot of the things that I would share maybe seem obvious if you take it at face value, but yeah, generally understand what motivates you or what guides you. That makes sense, and to know that if that you're guided by a sense of fulfillment that comes more easily through setting out on your own venture rather than from, say, taking something that has been handed to you, then that's useful to know. So whether you're a scientist or an entrepreneur, if you really get a thrill from being the first person to discover some idea, it's good to know that. Like, it's good to be aware of that and to realize to what extent that shapes your motivations. So I think the rest is something that people figure out on their own. But yeah,
Right.
I think it's just really hard to generalize on this, but it's a good question.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you so much, Justin, for being with us today and for sharing your story and your invaluable advice. Good luck with VisioLab. I'm looking forward to see more updates, and let's see how it all pans out. I'm positive. I think you're doing great, and yeah, I'm curious what happens in the future. I'm curious about which restaurants I can the full list.
Yeah, sounds good. We'll sync on that afterwards. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for joining, and for all of you guys who came to the end of this episode. If you like this content, please subscribe to this channel and please leave us any comments and questions you might have, and we'll get down to them and answer every single one of them. So, looking forward to this, and take care. Have a good day, everyone.